No, do not take guns. Do not start violence. The side that starts the violence will lose in the court of world opinion. We are already at a stage where the world understands the United States government is behaving exactly the way Mubarak's government did and exactly the way we're told Gaddafi's government did. They're repressing political dissent. They're repressing democracy. Because when you have 90% of Americans telling the Congress, do not use our money to save Wall Street, and Congress does it anyway, then democracy is dead. It has been murdered. It has been sold for 30 pieces of silver. And that's where we are right now. Do not do anything reckless or provocative. They want you to do that. They're desperate for somebody to do something really dramatic that can be used to demonize the Occupy movement and justify further repressive action. All you got to do is stand there and keep putting out the message, we're not going to pay for this any longer. If you lose money in the United States of America, that's your tough luck. If you don't like it, take your money elsewhere. We'll be back after the news and commercials. Now, down in Los Angeles, Mayor Villaraigosa is saying that Occupy LA cannot continue indefinitely. And he's right, and as I said before when we were talking about Dianne Feinstein, it doesn't need to continue indefinitely. Now, my reply to the mayor is, no problem. As soon as you jail the Wall Street crooks behind the mortgage-backed securities fraud that cost this nation $45 trillion, as soon as you forgive the American people for that debt that is not of their own making, and as soon as you shut down the Federal Reserve System that by design creates more debt than money to enslave us to the bankers, we'll call off the revolution. Short of that, no chance. It's not going to happen. Nobody's talking about staying in the streets of America for years on end. It's not going to take that long. All we have to do is stand in the streets of America and say, we are not going to pay for business losses any longer. There isn't anything else to keep money here in the United States by investors. We've lost our manufacturing. So at some point, it's going to be like birds on a wire. They're all sitting there watching what the other investors are going to do. And then the instant one of them pulls their money out of the United States, they'll all grab it and run so they don't get caught holding an empty vault. And it will all come apart. So the reality is that the U.S. government is actually very, very weak. Yeah, they got bombs and guns and all the rest of that stuff. But they're hopelessly in debt. The only thing that was keeping them current on the debt was the willing slavery of the American people, and we've just stood up and said no. Let's see. Over in New York, the Occupy Wall Street people had a solidarity march with Occupy Oakland. The New York police came and tried to crack that one down, swinging clubs and all the rest of it. This thing is turning violent. And it's sad to see. We knew it was going to happen. But thanks to citizen journalists, thanks to people having their cameras and their cell phones and their hidden little pen cameras, the truth of what is happening is getting out there. The propagandists are out there trying to say the protesters started it, they were hurling rocks and stuff. The video shows otherwise. And so the world knows which side initiated violence in this violent confrontation. The United States government is now committing the very kinds of offenses against protesters that were cited as justifications for the invasion of Libya and a lot of other countries around the world. Oh, yes, we've got to go in there and protect the protesters. We've got to protect democracy. Everywhere in the world except Wall Street. We're not allowed to have democracy in Wall Street because that's a fascist dictatorship, and you might as well just get used to it. Goldman Sachs, whose assets are almost $1 trillion, thanks to the generosity of the American taxpayer, has declared war on one of the smallest banks in New York, which has assets of about $30 million, which is a customer-owned community bank that also happens to be the bank for the people who've organized the Occupy Wall Street demonstration. They had a lot of money come in for donations. They figured, well, we got to put it in a bank, and they picked this community bank. It's being run the way banks were originally run in this country before all this private central banking nonsense came along. And Goldman Sachs was helping this little tiny community bank to do this little social event, to kind of show how they care for the community. You know, we'll take a couple of $1 trillion away from you, but we'll donate $5,000 for this social event. Well, now Goldman Sachs, because Occupy Wall Street is banking at this community bank, Goldman Sachs has pulled the money and is suing them to reprint all of the paperwork for this social function, to remove Goldman Sachs' name. And all Goldman Sachs is doing by this is making themselves look even pettier and worse, afraid. They're afraid of Occupy Wall Street. So anybody who's going around the net right now and reading the blogs and so forth, you can see they have hired every public relations whore that they can get their hands on. They're on triple time, and they're out there screaming. I mean, there was one I saw on Twitter, you know, and saying, "What was Scott Olsen doing with those skunks?" And my answer is he prefers the smell of them to the Wall Street public relations people, because they're all over the place right now. They're trying to find some way they can demonize Scott Olsen, demonize the protesters. Why? Because they don't dare let anybody discuss what the real issues are behind all of this stuff, which is the fraudulent mortgage-backed security, the biggest financial crime in history, and how the United States government decided, instead of sending the crooks to jail, to take trillions of dollars from you, the American people, $45 trillion so far, and pour it all over Wall Street so they could buy their way out of problems. And they basically trashed the entire global economy. And they're getting off scot-free. And when you stand up and you say, this is wrong, they shoot you. Yeah, it's a fascist dictatorship. And when that message goes out there that we're not going to pay the bills of Wall Street any longer, it will all start coming apart. We don't have to fight any pitched battles. We don't have to march into Washington, D.C., although it would be kind of fun to do that. But we don't have to. This revolution can be won standing right where you are right this very second, without taking one more step. Just be visible, be seen to survive and persevere. The message will get out there. It's already getting out there. Now, the Occupy movement is starting to talk about general strikes, which are very effective. Gandhi used them to get the British out of India. They're looking at one for November 2nd. As a nationwide general strike. We know that Karen Tostado's been talking about general strikes on the 15th of every month. I think now there's going to be the enthusiasm to do it. The latest polls are showing that support for Occupy America is growing among the general population, which is why we know that somewhere in the dark room of the executive branch, they're trying to figure out some dirty trick that they can do to destroy public confidence in the Occupy movement, like they did with that phony staged riot at Disneyland to destroy the Vietnam protesters back in 1970, I think it was. Remember, the other side loves to play dirty. They hire public relations people, they hire infiltrators, go on there and try and cause all the trouble they can. It's all dirty tricks. It's all they know how to do. So they're talking about a national general strike November 2nd. We're talking about pull your money out of the bank days on November 5th. Remember the 5th of November. And also another one on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th. They're talking about a global general strike early next year. Don't have a date on that one yet. But they had an interview out there today where they're trying to sell this idea that wealth inequality is a really good thing. It's the way things are supposed to be. And honestly, we rich people, we will look after the slaves. We'll take good care of the serfs. And obviously, with how many homeless people we have in the streets, that's certainly not true. That's not true at all. They're money junkies. It's addictive behavior. It's a disease, and it's time that we treat it as such. So this thing is probably going to get a little bit uglier. And I don't like to see the ugliness, and I don't like violence. But again, the degree of violence that is going to happen is entirely up to the United States government. And you people in the Occupy movement are heroes and heroines, and you are a model for what leaderless resistance and democracy are supposed to be. What, standing in the street there, demanding change, is the purest form of democracy there is. It's the only form of democracy that can't be hijacked with these electronic voting machines. That's why they're so terrified of you. Because the world is seeing that what the government claims you voted for and what you are screaming for now in the streets of America do not line up. The government has lost the aura of public support for all of its policies, whether it's domestic policy and spending policy, but even all these wars. All these other countries that the United States is invading and conquering, or invading and getting stuck in, those leaders and military leaders are looking back at the United States of America and they're saying, the United States government does not have the popular support for all these wars that the U.S. government claimed they did. And that will probably change their thinking. Probably change the way they approach this whole war situation. Maybe they won't be quite so ready to knuckle under and surrender and say, okay, yes, we'll have a private central bank. Sure, enslave our people to debt-based currency. Just leave us alone. I don't think they're going to do that much longer because the government of the United States does not operate with the consent of the governed. We'll be right back. And I don't think we're going to go I don't think we're going to go to the same extreme that we saw in the Nazis. First of all, the provenance of a lot of that stuff coming out of World War II is very much in doubt. But more importantly, if there had been an internet and a blogosphere and an alternative media in Germany in the 1930s, Adolf Hitler would have stayed in art school and flunked. He was a lousy artist. The fact that we do have this alternative media, we see it time and time again. All of these people inside the government and inside the bankers and everything, they're still trying to win the propaganda war by the tactics that worked at the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and the 1960s, and they just don't get how different the world is right now, how different the way information flows through society, and it is outside their control. And so, no, we're not going to get to the point where they're standing us on a trench and shooting us and putting us into the hole. What we are at the point right now is that when Americans are in the streets exercising their First Amendment rights to peacefully assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, they're being shot at. And then the media turns around and says, oh, they're wrong to be there. They should be at home working and slaving like loyal Americans. Standing in the streets, that only aids the terrorists, and all this other propaganda crap that we're getting, we're seeing in the media right now.
But they're being shot at and hit. I mean, they just shot a Marine in the face.
Yes, they did.
They had to remove a piece of his skull to alleviate swelling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at what point do we stand there and say, oh, okay, we're just going to stand here and get shot, because we're all peaceful protesters and we love peace and this is all great. And, at some point, somebody's got to say, hey, I don't want to get shot. Why am I going to stand here and let you shoot me? I don't want to get shot. I don't want to get shot. Do you?
No, I don't want to get shot. I absolutely do not want to be shot. And again, how bloody and violent this is going to be is entirely under the control of the government. And we know they have a history of resorting to bloodshed rather than admit when they're wrong or rather than obey the will of the people, for all their protestations to democracy notwithstanding. No, nobody, hang on a second, Jack. Nobody is saying that you should stand there and allow yourself to be shot. I know that Gandhi did that with the sticks and the beatings. It's not going to work. The purpose of standing there isn't to be a target for the cops. Okay, we don't want to be shot by the cops. We don't want to be tear gassed. We don't want to be any of that stuff. It's a question of who wants what they want more. And again, I think on the other side, the cops, they're being ordered to do this stuff. Most of them are not going to be enthusiastic about it simply because they understand Wall Street screwed up their pensions. The purpose of standing in the streets of America is not to be a target, but to send a message to the rest of the world. We, the American people, do not support the Federal Reserve. We do not support Wall Street. We do not support the federal government in all their wars, and we will not pay for Wall Street's bad business practices any longer. And once that message gets out, the foreign investment will vanish, and the whole system will come crashing down, and the revolution will have been won without having to fight any major battle. The tactics and weapons used on the Oakland protesters are identical to the ones that the Israeli army employed against Palestinian protesters. So we are all Palestinians now, and it's just something that we have to remember. Now, somebody also sent me, there's an Occupy police organization pulling together. This is for all the police officers who don't want to be shooting the protesters and don't want to be, shooting people in the head with tear gas canisters and crushing their skulls. These police officers understand fully that their own future, their retirement, the future of their children has been destroyed by Wall Street's mortgage-backed security fraud. They're having to make a choice whether to obey orders and support a system that seeks to pledge their children's lives as surety on government debt, or to say enough is enough. It's time to hit the reset button. I think the force of popular opinion is definitely on the side of the Occupy America people. I'm so proud of those kids here.